Hi folks, welcome to this video on anxiety control techniques. So anxiety, you've got over-aroused, that's led to nervousness, fear, worry. Sometimes these are called stress control techniques because when you become very anxious, you become stressed out. So we're going to look at the various ways that we can control high anxiety levels and hopefully improve our sports performance. Just quickly before we get onto the anxiety control techniques, it's worth checking these out. There's various definitions of anxiety. We have got cognitive anxiety, which is to do with the brain, which is, fear, worry, nervousness. So cognitive anxiety is mental anxiety. We've also got somatic anxiety. Somatic, think of the word somatotype, where I've looked at endomorphs, ectomorphs, mesomorphs, things like that. Somato meaning to do with the body. So somatic anxiety, elevated heart rate, breathing rate, blood pressure, muscle tension, anxiety associated with physiology as opposed to psychology. We've then also got, as you can see in these, a couple of other quick definitions. We've got trait anxiety, traits, genetic, inherited. So trait anxiety are your natural levels of anxiety. And finally, we have also got state anxiety, which is anxiety related to a state or a situation. So for example, you're not anxious, then you go into an exam hall and you become anxious, and that happens every time. Or you're anxious when you play games but you're not in training. That would be state anxiety, anxiety brought on by a certain state or a certain situation. Now with regards to these, it's these two we're most interested in terms of control techniques, because we're going to look at various cognitive and somatic control techniques and how to control anxiety. So let's look at them now. So there are four key cognitive anxiety control techniques: imagery, mental rehearsal, cue utilization, self-talk and thought stopping. So we've got to be able to try and say 2 or 3 things about each one if we want to get decent marks on this topic. So let's have a look at each one in turn. So mental rehearsal then, what is it? Well, it's mental pictures of you doing a successful performance. It's got to be you doing it right, or else what's the point? You imagine yourself doing it in a nice, calm setting, so you're not trying to increase your anxiety or your arousal any further. This is you doing the routine in a nice, calm setting. And there's 2 basic ways of doing imagery in mental rehearsal: internal and external. So internal is you actually picture yourself from inside your own body, so how it's going to feel, how the action's going to take place, how the joints are going to move, so you almost get a feeling of how it's going to happen. Or some performers prefer to do external, so you put yourself in the crowd watching you being successful. So they're the key things related to mental rehearsal, imagery, and how we can use that to control anxiety, cognitive anxiety, and get rid of any mental fears of nervousness, worry, apprehension, etc. So cue utilization then is where you direct your attention to a specific cue and you concentrate on a specific object or task. Now that might sound quite vague, quite wishy-washy, so let's try and give you a relevant example of that. So this guy here is Louis Oosthuizen, or Oosthuizen, however you want to pronounce it, 2010 British Open champion. Now he really came out of nowhere and won the British Open, and it turns out he'd been using this thing called cue utilization. What he'd done is he'd put a red dot, if you can see, this is actually his hands, his golf club, this little red dot. And apparently he'd been working with psychologists about bringing in a cue to help him calm down. And he'd done loads of sessions where, they'd put him into a calm place and relaxed, and, you're feeling confident and you feel like you can't miss the ball, you're invincible and things like that. And they had gradually introduced this idea of a red dot. So every time he saw a red dot, he had these feelings of confidence and calm and knowing that he's going to be successful. And then they stuck a red dot on his golf club. So every time he started to feel panicky, he would look down at that red dot and he would instantly go into his calm, happy place. So he's used a cue. He's directed attention to a specific cue, that being the red dot. He concentrates on that specific object and it initiates feelings of confidence and calmness, and therefore removes any cognitive anxiety that has taken place. So moving on to self-talk then, fairly straightforward, also known as positive self-talk. Basically, you start to feel a bit negative, you start to worry a little bit, so you replace that negative thought with a positive statement. You actually say something to yourself: I'm going to score this penalty, something like that. I'm going to beat this wing attack. I'm going to beat this power forward. Whatever it is, you say positive phrases to yourself. The key thing is not to have any negative words in there like don't or not or anything like that. I'm going to do this. I'm going to be successful. It's perfectly fine to feel this way. Something like that. So giving an example such as that is worth a mark in the exam as well. So the negative thoughts are replaced with a positive statement and give an example. Okay, so that's self-talk, fairly straightforward. And finally, thought stopping then. Again, this one's fairly straightforward, does exactly what it says. When you start to feel worried, when you start to feel nervous, when you start to get anxious about performance, you think, and sometimes athletes will picture the word stop flashing in their mind like a big neon light, like a big neon sign. And what you then do is you redirect your attention towards a positive thought. Now, easier said than done again. So let's look at an athlete who's rumoured to have used this strategy as well. So the story surrounding Jess Ennis was this. In 2011, Jess Ennis was in the lead of the Athletics World Championships heptathlon, but she had a disaster in the javelin. Really knocked her down the rankings, and she ended up coming away with a silver medal, having been in quite a dominant position for gold. So the javelin obviously then has, negative impacts on her. Going into London 2012, where she's the golden girl, of the Olympics, we all want her to win. So apparently she used this strategy where in qualifying in particular, when she started to get nervous about the javelin, oh God, it's going well, but here comes the javelin again, she would literally think of the word stop, she would picture it in her mind, and then she would replace that negative thought with a past javelin throw when she'd thrown really, really well. And she did that in qualification, ended up throwing a good distance, and then when she was in London 2012, she did the same again. When she started to get nervous in the javelin, she was leading at the time, doing really, really well, started to get a bit nervous about the javelin, so then pictured the word stop and thought back to her javelin throws from qualification, how well she did, how good it felt, and the distances she got, and she ended up throwing a really, really strong javelin throw in the London 2012, and she literally could afford to jog around the 800 metres at the end to win the gold. So there are a few practical examples of how these little strategies work, but all these methods are used to control cognitive anxiety, so that mental anxiety. So now on to somatic anxiety control techniques. So how are we now going to control elevated heart rates, elevated blood pressures, elevated breathing rates, all those physiological signs that we are now getting anxious, we are now starting to panic? And there's 3 key techniques we're going to talk about here for controlling somatic anxiety. So the 3 somatic anxiety control techniques are centering, progressive muscle relaxation, also known as PMR, and biofeedback. I've just misspelt that, mispronounced it, so I'll just quickly correct that, and then we'll start have a look at centering as a process to reduce somatic anxiety. So centering then, why is it called centering? Well, basically you're centering your attention onto your breathing. It's a form of breathing control. You're going to literally picture your diaphragm moving up and down, so we're really getting some nice big deep breaths, getting the abdomen involved, really big deep breaths, in through the nose, out through the mouth. I've put these as separate points because these are marks, right? And what you'll sometimes do is you'll maybe combine this with a bit of positive self-talk. As you are doing this deep breathing, you're going to say positive phrases to yourself. Come on, you can win this, you can do this. So, that's quite a good technique. And obviously the advantage of this technique is you can use it during competition. As soon as you feel the anxiety start to creep up, the heart rate start to increase, the blood pressure start to increase, the breathing rate start to increase, you can slow that all down by focusing on deeper, slower breaths, okay? Now PMR, if you haven't done it, I advise you do it. Type in progressive muscle relaxation or PMR onto YouTube, and there's loads of videos that come up, anything ranging from 10 minutes to a couple of hours. You lay flat on your back, okay, in a nice comfortable position, and the voice will tell you to do lots of deep breathing, and they'll get you to contract, hold and relax one muscle group at a time, usually starting at the top of the head or the shoulders and then working the way down over several minutes or even an hour or so. And what you do is you focus on one muscle group at a time by contracting, holding the tension, and then relaxing and releasing the tension. It teaches you to identify when the muscles are getting tense and then how to release that tension. The other thing as well is whilst you are laying flat, doing deep breaths, how can you increase your heart rate or blood pressure or breathing rate? You can't. So the somatic anxiety is again being reduced. You're getting rid of all those symptoms, physiological symptoms of stress and anxiety. So again, it's another method. Obviously, this one can't be done during a game. It can only be done before a game, often before you warm up. That's when performers will do this kind of technique. And finally, biofeedback. It involves using electrodes, so various electrodes that you can stick to your body, you know, even heart rate monitors, things like that, to measure things like heart rate, blood pressure, breathing rate, sweat production, muscle tension. So you can stick these to you and monitor these levels, and over time you'll learn to recognise when the anxiety is building. When is the tension about to increase in my muscles? When is the blood pressure about to increase? And so you can learn to control that somatic anxiety so that you're not as anxious going into performance. So they're the three common techniques used by performers in order to control somatic anxiety, i.e. physiological anxiety. And finally, just one last thing on cognitive and somatic control techniques. This is probably more of a cognitive one. Other way to control anxiety is to set yourself a SMART target. You might be thinking, why is that? Well, if I set myself a specific measurable goal that me and my coach have agreed to work towards, that's realistic, i.e. it's challenging but it's achievable, and there's a certain time limit, that should again control my anxiety, because I'm not working on anything that shouldn't be relevant. There's no way of there's definitely a way, of knowing that I've achieved it. I'm not just shooting in the dark or anything like that. Me and my coach and teammates are both working on it. If it's challenging but realistic, there shouldn't be any anxiety associated with not achieving it. And if it's time-based, I can regularly monitor my progress and see how well I'm doing, which again removes anxiety. So don't forget to put that SMART targets are also a good way to control anxiety, particularly cognitive anxiety. Hope you found this video useful, folks.